Football season is back, and what better way to celebrate the return by talking about last year's Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. We will first talk about the founding of the team. Next, we will go through each decade talking about the ups and the downs, finishing up with the present day. So don't go turning into a bird and fly away just yet, as we go over the large history of the Eagles. The Eagles were founded in 1933 by Bert Bell and Lud Ray, after they bought the bankrupt Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. Bell would change the name of the team to the Eagles, widening the scope of the team from Frankfurt to all of Philadelphia, because Frankfurt was just a small neighborhood in Philadelphia. So in doing so, he thought there would be more fans. Lud Ray would become the first head coach, and at first, the team did not have enough money to hire a big staff, so Bell and Ray even took tickets, were the ushers, the equipment managers, and even were the trainers. Their first game was played on October 15th, 1933, against the New York Giants in New York City, and Lud Ray was very confident they would win. However, they lost 56-0, and of course Ray would eat his words. Quarterbacks Jim Leonard and later Davey O'Brien were some of the standout players during the 1930s, with O'Brien even breaking single-season NFL passing records. Unfortunately, the Eagles would not have a winning season at all during the 1930s, and the 1940s brought even more challenges for the Eagles, because from 1940 to 1942, they still never had a season with a winning record. And to make matters even worse, the NFL and the Eagles lost a lot of players who went to fight in World War II. The Eagles made the decision to combine with the Pittsburgh Steelers because of World War II. They changed their name to the Steagles, and the Steagles would see good fortune as they would go 5-4-1, giving the Eagles franchise their first winning season in 1943. The Steagles would only last for one season, where both teams split back into their original teams, and the Eagles started a new era under coach Greasy Neal, with star quarterback Tommy Thompson, who was also blind in one eye, and never told anyone until the end of his career. He played so good with one eye, no one could really tell. The Eagles also had a star halfback named Steve Van Buren, who had won the NFL Rushing Yards Leader Award 4 times. The two led the Eagles to multiple winning seasons, including 2 NFL championship titles in 1948 and 1949. Their luck would run dry for the next 2 seasons, however, as they went 6-6 in 1950, and the Eagles made a controversial decision to fire head coach Greasy Neal. And on top of that, Steve Van Buren had a career-ending injury, putting the Eagles in bad shape for the 1951 season, where they went 4-8. Though quarterbacks Adrian Burke and Bobby Thomason would take over for Tommy Thompson after Thompson left to play in the Canadian Football League. Burke and Thomason would do a fairly good job, with the Eagles only having a losing season in 1955. Also having 2 all-star defensive players in Chuck Benderek, who was a linebacker.
This is the way you go after him. You're frothing from the mouth. You say, get him. Get him.
And Norm Willie, who was a defensive end, helped the Eagles greatly during the 1950s. Though the late 1950s are kind of a mixed bag, going 4-8 in 1957 and 2-9-1 in 1958. They would bounce back though in 1959, going 7-5. The start of the 1960s would be an amazing year for the Eagles, as they won the NFL championship in the 1960 MVP season versus the Green Bay Packers 17-13, with quarterback Norm Van Brocklin as MVP of the championship game. Though the 60s for the Eagles would see many hardships, even though they made it to the playoffs in 1961 with a 10-4 record. The next 2 seasons they had losing records. The hardships were so bad, in fact, that the Eagles from 1962 to 1969 only had 1 winning season in 1966. Fans even got so mad about the Eagles' performance in the 1968 season that during a game against the Vikings, fans threw snowballs at Santa Claus during a halftime Christmas celebration. The early to mid 1970s were also not great, with the Eagles having losing seasons from 1970 to 1973. They went 7-7 in 1974, then had losing seasons from 1975 to 1977. However, the Eagles would get a new head coach in 1976, and his name would be Dick Vermeil. Vermeil would begin to turn around the team, and by 1978, with good players like quarterback Ron Jaworski, wide receiver Harold Carmichael, and running back Wilbert Montgomery, would help the Eagles finish with a regular season record of 9-7, making it to the playoffs but losing the wild card round to the Falcons 14-13. The following season, riding on the momentum from last year's season, they went 11-5 and winning the wild card against the Bears 27-17, but lost the divisional round to the Buccaneers 24-17. The 1980 season would be an excellent season for the Eagles, going 12-4, winning the divisional playoff against the Vikings 31-16, and then beating the Cowboys in the NFC Championship game 20-7. Finally, the Eagles had made their first Super Bowl appearance, but they lost 27-10 against the Raiders, having the Lombardi Trophy slip away from their hands. The next year, coming off a really sad Super Bowl loss, the Eagles were ready to prove they could make it back to the Super Bowl again. And they would make the playoffs, but they would lose the wild card to the Giants 27-21. After the 1982 season, head coach Dick Vermeil would get burned out from coaching and resign as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. And from 1982 to 1987, the Eagles would not have a winning season, with quarterback Randall Cunningham and a very good defense, with defensive end Reggie White being named Defensive Player of the Year the season before the 1987 season. In 1987, the Eagles would start to make a comeback, finally going back to the playoffs in 1988 and 1989. But unfortunately, they would lose in the wild card for both of those seasons. The 1990s would start off just as good as the end of the 80s, with another playoff appearance in the wild card against the Washington Redskins, though they would lose 20-6. Despite going 10-6 in the regular season of 1991, they were third in the NFC East. So the Eagles did not clinch a spot in the playoffs, especially since Randall Cunningham got injured in their first game of the season against the Packers. Though the next year, during the 92 season, they would go 11-5, clinching a wild card spot against the Saints, in which they won, but they would lose to the Cowboys in the divisional round 34-10. The next 2 seasons would not be too kind, as they would go 8-8 during the 93 season and 7-9 during the 94 season. In 1995, with new head coach Ray Rhodes, the Eagles made it to the playoffs with a 10-6 record, and they won against the Lions in a high-scoring game of 58-37 in the wild card. Of course, they would lose the divisional round to their old nemesis, the Cowboys, 30-11. They would make the playoffs again in 1996, but lost to the 49ers 14-0. The Eagles went 6-9-1 in 1997 11, and do even worse in the 1998 season, going 3-13. The Eagles decided to get rid of head coach Rhodes in December of 1998 and replace him with future legendary head coach Andy Reid for the 1999 season. Though still in a rebuilding phase in 1999, Reid was unable to get a winning season, going 5-11. In the 1999 NFL Draft, the Eagles would select Donovan McNabb as the second overall pick, and the Eagles began to flourish. From the early to mid-2000s, they would go 11-5 in the 2000 season, making it to the divisional round, but losing to the Giants 20-10. In the 2001 season, they made it all the way to the NFC Championship game, losing to the Rams 29-24. With a 12-4 record, they secured a divisional round spot and won against the Falcons 20-6, but then losing the NFC Championship game to the Buccaneers 27-10. During the 2002 season. The 2003 season would see yet another NFC Championship appearance, though they would lose to the Panthers 14-3. The 2004 season was astounding as McNabb would throw for 3,875 yards, a career-high 31 passing touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions, as they would make it to the Super Bowl for the first time since 1980 versus the Patriots, but lost in a tight game 24-21. The following season was not great. Donovan McNabb was injured for almost half the season, and they went 6-10. They picked it back up though in 2006, making the playoffs but losing the divisional round to the Saints in a close 27-24 game. The Eagles would go 8-8 in 2007, but in 2008 they would make it all the way to the NFC Championship game against the Cardinals, but lost 32-25. The 2009 season was a weird one, as the Eagles made the controversial decision to sign Michael Vick, who was suspended from the league and went to prison for 18 months for dogfighting. And Donovan McNabb himself even told reporters that it was him who gave the idea to Andy Reid to sign him. Though Vick was not eligible to play until week 3 of that season, he was the third string quarterback behind Kevin Kolb, who was the backup for McNabb. And the Eagles would go 11-5, making it to the playoffs, losing the wild card though to, you guessed it, their longtime rivals, the Cowboys, 34-13. The 2010 season was actually a fairly good season despite trading McNabb to the Washington Redskins and giving the starting quarterback role over to Michael Vick. Even though Michael Vick was a terrible human being, he still had it as a football player and threw for just over 3,000 passing yards and a career-high 21 passing touchdowns and only 5 interceptions. With other star players like wide receiver and famed kick returner Deshaun Jackson, and star defensive players in defensive end and linebacker Trent Cole and cornerback Asante Samuel, they made it back to the playoffs, going 10-6, though they would lose to the Packers in the wild card 21-16. The next 2 seasons would not be good for the Eagles, as they went 8-8 in 2011 and an even worse record of 4-12 in 2012. The Eagles decided it was time for a change in head coach and fired Andy Reid. But we all know how great Reid's next coaching job would be when he got to the Kansas City Chiefs. Reid was replaced by Oregon head coach Chip Kelly ahead of the 2013 season. Kelly didn't do too bad in his first season, leading the Eagles to the playoffs, even with their starting QB, Michael Vick, missing out on a lot of games due to a hamstring injury. It was the second-year quarterback Nick Foles who stepped up, having probably the best season of his career, throwing for 2,891 yards, 27 passing touchdowns, and just 2 interceptions. Though the Eagles lost to the Saints 26-24 in the wild card, turmoil would strike the Eagles, however, for the next few seasons. In 2014, they struggled with QBs as Nick Foles did not play well and was injured in Week 9, with infamous butt fumbler Mark Sanchez now leading the team. Though Sanchez didn't do half bad actually, and they went 10-6, but missing the playoffs despite being second in the NFC East. In 2015 and 2016, they went 7-9 in both seasons. In 2017, the unexpected happened, however. Carson Wentz, drafted second overall to the Eagles in 2016, had an amazing season in 2017, throwing for 3,296 yards, a career-high 33 passing touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. Though in Week 14, Wentz suffered an ACL tear and missed the rest of the season. As all hope was lost, backup Nick Foles, who was traded away from the Eagles for 2 seasons but was brought back for the 2017 season, and with the help from legendary tight end Zack, they would both make a statement in the playoffs. The Eagles would beat the Falcons 15-10 in the divisional round and destroyed the Vikings 38-7 in the NFC Championship game. They made it to the Super Bowl against the heavily favored New England Patriots and the GOAT, Tom Brady. They won the Super Bowl in a surprise win of 41-33. Foles would even be named MVP of the Super Bowl the next year, with Wentz back under center and Foles playing backup despite having an amazing playoff run. The previous year, they made it back to the playoffs, only to lose the divisional round to the Saints 20-14. The 2019 season would not be as glorious, but they made it to the playoffs, however, but they lost in the wild card to the Seahawks 17-9. The 2010s had cemented the Eagles as real league contenders, and going into the next decade, the Eagles would prove they still had what it takes to play at a really high level. In the 2020 NFL Draft, the Eagles got QB Jalen Hurts as the 53rd overall pick. Hurts would play backup to Wentz until Week 13 when Wentz was benched against the Packers. And Hurts came in, and despite having an okay performance of 109 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, and 1 interception, Hurts stole the starting position from Wentz in Week 14. They would go 4-11 in 2020, but the Eagles had found their new franchise QB. They gradually regained their footing in the next few seasons, going 9-8 in 2021, making the playoffs but losing 31-15 against the Buccaneers. In 2022, they would go 14-3 and make it all the way to the Super Bowl against the very talented Kansas City Chiefs, losing to them in a close 38-35 game, foreshadowing a Super Bowl to come only a couple of years later. 2023 was a decent season, as they went 11-6, making the playoffs but losing the wild card to the Buccaneers 32-9. As we all know, the 2024 season would be a dream come true, as the Eagles would sign one of the best running backs in the league from the Giants, Saquon Barkley. Hurts and Barkley would light the league on fire, as Hurts would throw for 2,903 passing yards, 18 passing touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions, while Barkley rushed for a career-high 2,005 yards and another career-high 13 rushing touchdowns. Of course, making it to the Super Bowl with a rematch against the Chiefs, getting another shot after the sad loss in Super Bowl 56. They did get their revenge, winning the Super Bowl with pretty much a blowout win of 40-22. Hurts would be named MVP, throwing for 221 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and 1 interception, and even getting 1 rushing touchdown. Through thick and thin and not having a real Super Bowl contending team until the late 2010s, Eagles fans are finally getting to see the Eagles turn into one of the most prolific football teams of of the modern era. Well, my Birds fans, we have finally reached the end of this video. Did I leave out any interesting history facts about the Eagles? If so, don't be scared. Let your outside voice be heard in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.